the Chief Business Advisor at Wilson Sonsini, one of your sponsors today. And really excited to have a top-tier panel here today. Unfortunately, Ann Summers is not able to join us. She had to depart early. But I want to introduce Curtis and Ryan, who are going to first give a couple of words about their amazing experience and backgrounds, and then we'll jump into some questions. So, Curtis, take it away.
Hello, my name is Curtis Sprouse. I'm the CEO and president of EurekaConnect, a behavioral science company, and the IBE, the Institute for Biomedical Entrepreneurship. My background, accounting and finance, Ernst & Winnie, back in the 80s, which dates me a little bit just by the name of the very firm. Most people don't even recognize it. From there, CFO, CEO of several healthcare startups, founded a company called Boston Market Strategies that I ran for 20 years, doing third-party payer strategy for biopharma and device. I oversaw and led the launch and management of over 400 assets in that period of time. We also had an extensive practice in clinical trial process efficiency. We were running studies to develop pharmacoeconomic data to power our pricing models, and realized that the academic institutions were pretty inefficient in how they were doing it. So ended up being hired to redesign and engineer research at Penn, Drexel, Thomas Jefferson, Fox Chase, and what is now Rutgers. In 2009, because of my work in universities, I'd gotten fascinated with translation, and I founded a behavioral science company. So I spent about 70% of my day training CEOs at some of the biggest companies, GE Healthcare, Pfizer, J&J, Astra, Sanofi are all clients of ours, where I work at the C-level down, using our behavioral tools to develop what I call behavioral mechanisms of action. Why do people act and react the way they do? And then we can be very purposeful and direct in how we develop their leadership skills in their teams. And then the last piece is, what do you do with all these great leaders once you build them? Well, translation, the Institute for Biomedical Entrepreneurship is basically a launch of, it launches people into this idea of entrepreneurship through a 5-day program. So it's a 5-day program, graduate level program on translation, and basically we have them come in, they do the behavioral training before they show up, they do 4 days of content, it's the curriculum, and then the afternoons they have to work on a project. So the very first day you get 1 minute to stand up in front of the room and convince people to work on your project. Half the rooms come from industry, half of them come from academia, and in that process of doing this, at the last day they have to pitch to an investment panel. 3 investors, 10-minute pitch, 10-minute Q&A, and they get a thumbs up or down. You're either ready for another meeting or you're not. That process has helped to launch over 250 companies since 2017. So that's a summary.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be with you. My name is Ryan Rust. I live here in Utah. My wife, Hannah, and I have 3 kids. I graduated from Brigham Young University with a degree in nutrition, and then went on to pharmacy school in Indiana. And I work for Eli Lilly and Company. And the perspective that I'm bringing, so I've spent a lot of my career in market access, in contracting with PBMs and health plans, but also in commercialization strategy and pricing for new launch products in the US, as well as in sales. Where I'm at now is in corporate business development within our Catalyze 360 group at Eli Lilly. So kind of looking down the road, what would it take in order for a biotech company to have their program be acquired by a pharma company through a licensing deal or a merger and acquisition? The Catalyze 360 group that I'm part of in particular, we're really trying to help the biotech ecosystem. We can help a company go all the way from discovery through phase 2A proof of concept clinical trials. So at Lilly, we offer up our scientists, our capabilities. We have a venture investing arm at Lilly Ventures. We have an incubator lab space in Lilly Gateway Labs with locations throughout the US and international now. So there's a lot of different mechanisms where my group can help biotech companies take their innovation out of the lab, get it into clinical trials, and get it to market. And I spoke with several of our partners that we've worked with over the last couple of years in preparation for this panel, so I hope to share their perspectives with you today.
All right, let's get into it. I'm excited to hear what your insights are. So as you guys know, the title of this session is What You May Not Know About Launching a Life Science Company. So as you know, the bar is high to be successful in any startup, and life sciences is particularly challenging because the science has to work and then everything else has to fall into place. So I kind of want to start with sort of the end game in mind, Curtis and Ryan. And can you talk to us about what do you need to see to ensure, if you're a founder or an early stage management team, how do you ensure that there's an appropriate product market fit for the technology that you're developing? And then just to, related to that, how do you ensure that that translates into a compelling message to the investors who have to fund you before you can even get off the ground? We'll start with Ryan.
I think a helpful mental model is to think through the lenses of proof of concept and proof of relevance. The latter term being coined by Ed Saltzman of Humanity, but I think it's really relevant here. So obviously, as you're thinking about a therapeutic or some technology to take forward as a biotech and as a founder, you're first thinking of proof of concept. How do you get that in vitro and then in vivo data? How do you understand in a human, is it going to be safe and effective? And you can invest there and get that data in that package and de-risk your platform and understand that you have proof of concept. But you may not yet have proof of relevance. There's so much that comes after getting into human clinical trials and even after getting FDA approval. What you really want to understand is, how is your therapeutic or technology better than standard of care? Not standard of care today, but standard of care at the time that your product would come to market. So if you think about in the US, we have CVS Caremark, Express Scripts, United Healthcare are our PBMs. Outside of the US, you have health technology assessment agencies. You have NICE in the UK, HES in France, GBA in Germany. They're looking at, does your technology or therapeutic provide clinical meaningful benefit relative to the standard of care that's coming in the future? And is the drug cost effective? Those are important things to drill down on and understand. One of the important but difficult decisions that you may have to make once you've gotten proof of concept and done a first-in-human dose and understand is your product efficacious in humans, you may have to decide to pause the program and to stop investing if there's no market opportunity for it, if there's no proof of relevance. It's really important to think through that latter lens as far as what's going to be attractive to a pharma company, to an acquirer, and not just at that stage, but what's going to be covered by payers, both in the US and internationally. What are prescribers ultimately going to use as you think about a commercialization plan? So I think those two lenses of proof of concept, but also proof of relevance, need to be balanced. And it's great if your lead program got proof of concept, but if there's not a market opportunity, if there's not proof of relevance there, you might want to look at what else do you have in your pipeline that's further back that you can then invest in and accelerate and take forward.
So I'll offer an example, a case study. I think two key elements are really understanding the patient journey. How are you going to impact the patient journey? And is it going to be significantly beneficial to the patient and then the environment around the patient? And the example, or the second one I think is extremely important, I'll offer this in my example, is strategic fit. Where do you fit within the strategic environment, the key players in the market where you could potentially exit to or partner for distribution and commercialization of your asset? So Momenta Pharmaceuticals, Tony Manning was the chief scientific officer there. He's the founder of the IBE with me, co-founder of the IBE. And I've worked with him on a number of companies right now over the years to help develop his R&D teams. And if you look at Momenta, they were a generic and then biosimilar company before Tony entered. And they wanted to go into first-in-human assets. And within 5 years, Tony basically rebuilt the R&D team, reduced it down to about a third of what it was when he took over, and developed a portfolio of assets over that 5-year period that eventually, so the market cap of Momenta at his entering the scene was about $200 million. That portfolio of assets was sold to J&J 5 years later for $6.5 billion. And so what he started with in looking at inflammatory diseases, where are there opportunities for us within this area of research that the patient is underserved, and where can we develop a product to meet that need that's significant to a strategic? And that played out through that particular example. So you can look that one up if you're interested in getting more detail on it. But I think it's a great example of how Tony worked backwards from the patient and the strategics and how they would be looking at the market and where the opportunity would be. One of the most interesting parts of that whole story is when Momenta did their analysis of what the market potential was, and they negotiated with J&J for that transaction. At the end of the negotiation, J&J said they had underestimated the market size by 300 times. And that's playing out now because it's a multi-million-dollar product, the first product they launched out of that set of assets.
Matt, I want to build on something that Curtis shared because it really resonated, and I appreciated that the idea of strategic fit and starting the conversation there. And to tie it to something we heard earlier this morning about target product profile and jobs to be done. Oftentimes, I see biotech companies and even pharma companies, they take a program and a technology and they think about the technology's attributes, what it's good at, and they build a target product profile around that. I encourage you to do what Curtis just said. Think about what are the needs of the patient, what are the needs of the providers, of the payers, of that healthcare ecosystem, and start the idea of a target product profile there. What are problems that you can solve? It's almost like you're creating an ideal TPP, and then you're going to design a very different preclinical and clinical evidence package that supports your program getting there. That's going to help ensure that you have that strategic fit and that relevance, that not just proof of concept, but proof of relevance down the road so that you are attractive to that pharma partner when you get there. So it is kind of beginning with the end in mind, but I think that's a very powerful concept that Curtis reminded us of.
Yeah, and I think that's 100% relevant. And you may be saying, well, I'm a small company. I may not even be in the clinic if I have a therapeutic. So, what should I do? But I totally agree. I think, even developing a target product profile, if you have a preclinical asset, is a prudent thing to do. Because again, you have to anticipate what is the market need, what is the clinical relevance going to be for your given product, and start early so that when you talk to investors, not only are they going to be impressed with the science of your company, but they'll understand the sophistication you have at this early stage of being ready to commercialize. And you can do that through market research, voice of the prescriber, voice of the patient. And, Curtis, you mentioned one example of, how to do that. There's another example of a company you may have heard of called Pfizer. And does anybody know they had a product called Exubera, I think, or it was a dry powder insulin inhaler. And they basically spent billions and billions of dollars developing the product, getting it approved, and launching it. And it was a complete failure. And why? Because patients didn't want to inhale this plastic tube, which looked like a bong, some people would say. And if they had done their market research and talked to more patients and more prescribers, I would argue they probably would have avoided that misstep. So that's an extreme example. And the good news is if you're starting a company or early stage, you have the ability now to shape the game to win by doing some of the, taking some of these steps.
Matt, that's not extreme. So if you look at it, what is it? 1 in 10 compounds, 1 in 10,000 compounds makes it through the process, right? And of the drugs that actually get approved and go to market, how many of them make money? Does anybody know? What percentage of the products that actually make it to market actually ever generate revenue and profit? 30%. It's actually under 30%. It's more like 28%. So, I hear all the time, well, if we can just get FDA approval, it'll be successful. No, it won't. It won't. 30% of the time, it may be successful. And I don't think entrepreneurs think that way. Many of the ones I work with, they think if I can just get it approved, if I can just get a regulatory process and get it through, it will be successful. Strategics are thinking about profitability. And so to the extent that you start thinking that way, it helps to give you an advantage with regard to how you're designing your studies and how you're proceeding at those very early stages. You can't talk to the strategic soon enough. We've got a project right now we're talking to Lilly about, and I won't disclose what it is, but if I told you what it was, you would never believe Lilly's interested. You would, why would Lilly be interested in that? And when I tell you why they're interested, you'd say, oh, that makes a ton of sense. But it doesn't, on the surface, you wouldn't think that Lilly would have an interest in this particular asset. So again, you need to think about the strategic fit. It's so, so important. One thing I'll offer you, how many of you are starting companies or have a company? How many of you are trying to raise money? Probably it looks like maybe a quarter of you. So what's the one thing an investor knows about you before you start to tell them about your project? And they'll be right every single time. What's the one thing the investor knows with absolute certainty about your project? Anybody have an idea? What you're about to tell them is wrong. They know what you're going to tell them is wrong. What they're trying to figure out is how wrong it is And are you the person to figure out when you're wrong and fix it before it's their problem? That's what the investors are trying to figure out. So a lot of this is the more that you can get towards the end game, understanding the market dynamics and where you fit in that, that gives them comfort that you're going towards the right objective.
And Matt, and just to add on one more thing to what Curtis shared, with the capital that you're given by investors, you may have two chances, but really you have one really good shot on goal to get your clinical evidence package right. And I would include preclinical evidence in that as well. Often, clinical trials and that whole evidence package is designed to get FDA approval, where things like versus placebo may be good enough in that disease state. But this is really where you want to build in what would it take to get covered by CVS Caremark? What would it take to get covered by NICE in the UK, for example, if that's a market that you're going for? It's important that you're building an evidence package and a clinical trial plan that will meet both the FDA regulatory endpoints and what's needed to get coverage and to be able to commercialize off of that. So Curtis mentioned that. I just wanted to put a pin in it. It's important that you're satisfying both needs as you're going forward and building out your clinical trial evidence.
That's great. So speaking of fundraising, Curtis, you asked, sounds like a bunch of folks in the room are raising money, which is the reality of most ventures these days. So let's turn to kind of financial readiness and specifically to the panel. How do you guys ensure that a company's raising the right amount of capital at the right time? And what are some of the mistakes you've seen with companies you've worked with that are doing this?
I think that a few things that I would share, and one of these was mentioned this morning. It's so important that you have a plan beyond the next value inflection point, that you are looking out and ahead all the way to the end. Even if you're planning to exit or get acquired, do you have a plan for what it would take to commercialize your therapeutic or your technology? Really making sure that you have that long-term view. I often see companies that have pitched to me over the years, they are just looking at that next value inflection point. They have a clear operational plan until then, and then there's nothing beyond that. It's important to think long-term. And then Matt, the other perspective I want to offer on the things that maybe people get wrong or could do better actually is the misuse of capital, the capital that has been entrusted to you. I think the two most important decisions that you will make in terms of hiring or outsourcing a capability outside of your immediate company is CMC manufacturing and material generation and who you use as your outside counsel. And here's why I say that. I know companies that have gone out and looked at different CDMOs and CMC manufacturers. They're trying to make sure that they can generate material for their clinical trial. They get different bids and they go with the low price. You get what you pay for. I know companies that are in the middle of clinical trials only to find out their CMC manufacturer has a big issue, a big challenge, and they're not able to make the material that's needed for the clinical trial and things have stalled. That's a mistake that you don't want to make. You want to ask the CDMO, let me know other clients that you've worked with. I want to talk to them. But then you also want to go into your own network and really find out who you're signing up with. That's such a critical decision to make is CMC and material generation. And then the other is your outside counsel. There may come a time, especially if you're a platform technology company that's also developing a therapeutic pipeline, where you will want to bring in money through partnerships, funding through working with pharma companies or other biotech companies, not just equity investments. Every pharma contract you make, in fact, the very first partnering contract that you sign up for will decide everything else that you're able to do with other partners in the future. It will define that sandbox. It's so important that you have really good outside counsel that is protecting your intellectual property, that you're not giving too much away, and that the language is being crafted such that you can deliver on the first pharma partnership, but you can also sign up additional partners down the road. I've seen, in fact, there's one company that I worked with, they hired a corporate single lawyer LLC out of Florida. Not a good fit. They did not have deal experience. You want really good counsel that knows this space. not just corporations in general, but they know deals, they know biotech transactions. So again, CMC manufacturing and hiring the right outside counsel so that you're using your capital well.
I would say one of the big things I see with academic companies that they misuse the non-dilutive funds early on, significantly misuse the non-dilutive funds, and it's because they're still doing a scientific project or a technical project, and they're not thinking about commercialization early enough. The other thing I see is that they typically don't raise enough capital. They don't think about, you know, if you look at their budgets and what they're doing, they're not thinking about intellectual property. They're investing very lightly on intellectual property. At the end of the day, Lilly's going to buy an IP portfolio. Oh, yes. You want to know you can protect it.
Yes.
And
yes.
It doesn't matter. If the science can be great, but if they can't protect it, they don't want it. Because they know if they're successful, they're going to have a threat on that franchise, and they need to be able to protect it. So if you look at Chuck Yon, who's another founder of the IBE, he was general counsel for Checkmate and Cooley, two Art Creek companies. Art was the head of R&D for Pfizer, and he spun out 2 cancer platforms. 2 of the most successful phase 2 transactions ever. And Chuck said when they did those transactions, the acquiring companies always said, this is one of the best IP portfolios we've ever seen. It was really well constructed. It was very thorough. It touched on everything. So they basically, at the end of the day, the technology was successful because of the intellectual property and the portfolio of patents that they put behind it. Again, I don't want to disparage universities, but if you have patents being filed by the universities, it's not the same as someone that's coming out of Lilly saying, these are the types of things we want to see as far as protection on this particular asset. So one of the things I recommended to one of the companies this morning was they're doing a tech transfer deal with the university, and they have 1 patent that they have, a provisional patent. And I said, what you need to do is you need to really work on that. And they said, well, we're working with all these different law firms. I said, well, why don't you find someone in industry who's actually acquired assets in this space and tell you what those deals should look like? And so I'm going to make some introductions for them. But I think these are the kinds of things that you need to be thinking about, the spectrum of things that have to be captured early on that aren't associated directly with or solely with the science and the advancement of the science, but on the business, building the business.
So what I'm hearing you guys say is there's a little bit of a paradox insofar as, you know, whereas an entrepreneur may default to wanting to be very cost conscious and getting the cheapest provider of the service, what I'm hearing you guys say is actually you need to spend what it takes to work with the best and the brightest, whether it's a CDMO, whether it's a legal advisor, you know, your patent strategist, because ultimately if you don't, it will come back to haunt you and your company.
Yeah, not only that, but look, I've been doing this for 40 years. And we have a company right now I helped found. It's out of the Netherlands. It's a neuromodulation company for obesity. And so we're modulating oxytocin up and down the pituitary gland. We had compassionate use for a patient pain indication initially. So we've got some data that shows that we can actually do this, right? And we went out, now we're raising $5 million was the initial raise we were going after. We started to talk to the strategics and we started to talk to investors, and they said, whoa, you guys aren't going fast enough and big enough. You guys should be raising more like 21 million to do your phase 1 and tee up the next study. So again, the market will help you to understand what you're doing if you have a good idea and you've got science that backs it. They'll help you to understand what that framework. But if you're always thinking small, like I'm just going to do one step and one step and one step and one step without understanding what the end game is, then you're going to limit your opportunity. And by the way, investors are looking for big deals right now. I was just at an investor conference, and I heard 6 investment banks talk about the fact there's a lot of the investors right now are behind schedule on their investment. They've been holding back and being cautious on where they made their investments. They need to put money to work, and now they need bigger deals by definition because they got to get that money into the market sooner. So if you're going out trying to raise $5 million and they need to place 25, you know, just by the structure of what you're trying to do, you're going to eliminate a lot of potential investment opportunity.
And Matt, I agree with what you just said, and like another helpful mental model to think through is, what kind of risk do you want to take on? Like where do you want the risk to be as you think about the future of your company and your program? Maybe you're already taking on novel target risk versus a target that maybe we know works but hasn't been drugged yet, but we know the downstream effects of that target. Maybe you have platform risk. Do you want to add to that CMC, unvetted CMC manufacturer risk? Do you want to add to that a weak IP portfolio or protection? So I like to think about, where do I want to place the risk and where can I accept that? And then where do I want to make an investment to either directly address or take away or minimize that risk in some way? And my experience working with many biotech companies at Lilly, the CMC manufacturing space, again, in the IP space, are places where you don't want to take on undue risk.
Yeah, and it goes back to, I think, Curtis, you touched on it. When you speak to investors, everyone's money is green, but not everyone shares the same kind of strategic vision that you do. So ideally, you want to seek out those investors that have the deep pockets and that can really fund the company the way you want and need it funded, which means not drip feeding it if you can avoid it, because ultimately, that's going to get you to the greatest chance of success. Good. Well, we have just another few minutes, so I want to pivot to culture. And we heard a little bit about culture this morning and how critical culture is to the success of a company. So, Curtis, for you and Ryan, and I know you in particular, Curtis, have a lot of perspective on this. Can you talk to us about how a company culture can kill the success of the company, and probably more importantly, what can a founding team do to ensure they build a winning culture as they grow?
Well, with small companies, it really starts with the CEO. The CEO establishes the culture and the expectation. And with larger companies like Lilly, I would contend there's no one culture. There's cultures within teams at Lilly, right? But when you have a small company, it's about that CEO. And Paul this morning in the session said, be yourself. Be your true self. I disagree with that, and here's why. I'm a numbers guy, so I live by the 80-20 principle, that 80% of CEOs are average to bad, and 20% of them are really good. So what I would do is I'd modify what Paul said a little bit. Bring your best self. Bring your best self, because I see a lot of CEOs that are just toxic. They're toxic, and they create a toxic culture, and they create challenges within their organizations that just aren't necessary. I did feedbacks with 3 CEOs this week, and one in particular, I would say is actually a very good leader, but he's not a great leader. And he's probably about 30 years of experience. And one of the things that was really nice about our discussion is when we were going through his behavioral data and the challenges he was having, communication score 3 out of 100. Discipline score 98 out of 100. He's a perfectionist that doesn't explain what he's thinking, curse of knowledge. He thinks things with great clarity, but he doesn't explain them to the team, and his team doesn't implement, and then he gets frustrated, and then he takes it out on the team. So, I could get into this. I could talk about the behavioral data all day long, but
I actually want to hear more from Curtis. I'll share a few additional thoughts, so thank you for sharing that. One of them Matt alluded to already. I think it's so important, maybe the number one thing, and this was shared to me from one of the CEOs I talked to out of Boston, is to be 100% clear on your purpose. Why have you started this company? Why are you going after this technology or this disease state or these indications? Is it to cure the disease that a family member has? Is it to make a quick exit and a few bucks? Do you believe in the science? Are you mission driven? You want to be 100% clear on that purpose, and then surround yourself with people that are aligned to that purpose. They may have differing viewpoints and ideas of how to get there, but when science happens, and it will, and you have to make tough trade-off decisions, do I prioritize this program and stop this program, and walk through those kinds of decisions with your board and your executive team and your employees? You want people that are aligned to that purpose, why you've started the company. Matt, to your earlier point, what money are you going to take in? You want investors that are aligned to that purpose, for when things get tough, you can make those decisions together. I think that's the second principle that's so important, and this was popularized by Lynn G. Robbins of Franklin Quest. He's a faith-based leader now, but it's being 100% responsible. So I was talking to another CEO friend out of Canada. She hired a scientist that went in to work in the lab one day. His shift ended, and as he was walking out, the freezer alarm was going off. Now, I know what all of you would have done. You would have gone and checked on the freezer. He walked out the door, and that CEO said to him, "What were you thinking?" And he said, "My shift was done. That was for the next person to figure out." That's not the kind of person that you want. That is toxic. You want people that are agents of the company, that are going to work outside of their job description, that are going to recognize the interdependencies and the synergies, and that are going to do what's right for the company. And then the third principle, and this came from the CEO of Anthropic, Dario, make less promises to your employees, but keep all of them. Make less promises, but keep all of them. In my industry, there's a lot of promises that are thrown around about compensation and quick promotions and new responsibilities. If you can't follow through on those, don't make those promises. You want to attract top talent, both scientifically and from a business standpoint, but more importantly, you want to retain them. And that will come through building trust over time by keeping those promises over time. So make less promises, but keep all of them.
I'll give one last piece of advice. Always try to elevate the relationship every time you have a conversation. I don't care if it's at the gas station, at the grocery store, with a colleague. Elevate the conversation, elevate your relationship, and then the situation. Leave the situation better than you found it. If you do those two things, always advancing your relationship with Ryan, and then always trying to improve upon where we are with regard to what we're trying to solve together, you're going to be in a better place, and that will help your culture tremendously.
Two quick follow-ups. First, Ryan, for you, when in your role at Lilly, have you ever not done a deal because the culture of the partner wasn't what you needed it to be?
Absolutely. And the interesting thing is you pick up on the culture in the deal negotiation, and you quickly understand what it's going to be like to either be in a long-term collaboration with that company or to acquire them. One of the number one things that we think about if we think about acquiring a company is the people. We think of the people and a retention plan around them as very important, as well as the science and the technology and the program itself. So that culture that you're building, the executive team that you're building, the people that you're hiring, that's an important part of the package that companies like Lilly absolutely look at when they think about potential acquisitions down the road.
And Curtis, last question for you. Have you, in all your years of working with executives and emerging growth companies, have you been able to course correct a company that's on the wrong track with regard to culture?
So many of them. I mean, I'm so proud of some of the people that have come. We have one right now that I helped establish, and the founder is a very difficult person, but a genius, maybe one of the top chemists in the world. But we've been able to keep them sort of on track through the behavioral training and development, and we've been able to bring people in to help this person be a better version of themselves, and we couldn't have done it without data. We really couldn't. But I could give you hundreds of examples of where we've done it.
Great. Well, we'd love to keep going, but I think we're at time. So please join me in thanking this amazing panel for their insights today.